My son's teacher asked, "Why does your child know a language that was declared extinct by the CIA in 1987? Mrs. Pemberton stood in the doorway of her classroom holding a tablet showing a video of my 7-year-old son speaking words I didn't recognize. The afternoon sun cut through the windows behind her, making her gray hair look almost white. I'd come for a routine parent-teacher conference expecting to discuss Oliver's math grades or his tendency to daydream during reading time. Instead, she was playing me footage of my son speaking fluently in what sounded like a mix of clicks, tonal shifts, and guttural sounds that seemed impossible for a child's mouth to produce. "I don't understand," I said, watching Oliver on the screen. He was sitting at his desk during free time, whispering to himself while drawing. The sounds coming from his mouth were deliberate and structured. This wasn't nonsense. This was language. Mrs. Pemberton's hand was shaking slightly as she held the tablet. "I have a doctorate in linguistics. I spent 6 years studying endangered languages before I became a teacher. What your son is speaking is Koresh. It's a language from a small ethnic group in the Caucasus region that was documented by Soviet linguists in the 1970s. By 1987, the CIA's Cultural Preservation Database declared it extinct. The last known speaker died in 1986. There are maybe 3 people in the world who could even recognize what I'm hearing, and I'm one of them." The hallway suddenly felt too narrow. Other parents were filing past us toward their own conferences, chatting about science fair projects and upcoming field trips. Normal concerns, normal lives. I looked at the video again. Oliver's lips moved with the precision of someone who'd spoken this language for years, not a child who'd never left suburban Maryland. Maybe he heard it somewhere? A documentary or a video game? Mrs. Pemberton shook her head. "Mrs. Reeves, there are no documentaries. There are no recordings available to the public. The only existing documentation of Koresh is locked in classified archives. The Soviet linguists who studied it were all killed during the conflicts in the 1990s. Their research was seized by intelligence agencies and buried. When I say extinct, I mean systematically erased. The people who spoke it were ethnically cleansed. The villages were burned. The CIA declared it extinct not because the last speaker died naturally, but because they wanted the world to forget it ever existed." I felt my purse slip from my shoulder and caught it reflexively. Why would the CIA want to erase a language? She glanced down the hallway before answering, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because the Koresh people witnessed something during the Soviet collapse that powerful interests didn't want documented. Their oral histories contained information about weapons programs, mass graves, and war crimes that would have implicated both US and Russian officials. Erasing the language meant erasing the testimony. No speakers, no witnesses, no accountability." My throat felt tight. "You're saying my 7-year-old son somehow knows a language that was deliberately destroyed by intelligence agencies? That's impossible." Mrs. Pemberton pulled up another video, this one from 3 days ago. Oliver was on the playground during recess, sitting alone under a tree. He was holding a smooth gray stone and speaking to it in that same impossible language. His expression was serious, almost reverent, as if the stone could understand him. "I've been documenting this for 2 weeks. He speaks Koresh when he thinks no one is listening. He speaks it to objects, to himself, to the air. And it's not fragments or broken phrases. It's fluent, native-level fluent. The grammar is perfect. The tonal patterns are exact. Mrs. Reeves, I need to know where he learned this because if he's been exposed to materials that shouldn't exist, there could be serious implications." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her she was mistaken, that my son was just making noises, that this was all a misunderstanding. But I'd seen the videos. I'd heard the complexity. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory was surfacing. My father's study. The one room in his house I'd never been allowed to enter as a child. The recordings he'd played late at night when he thought everyone was asleep. My father who'd died 6 months ago and left Oliver a locked trunk in his will. The drive home was a blur. I called my husband from the car and told him we needed to talk the moment I got back. Dennis was in the garage when I pulled in, organizing his fishing gear for a trip he'd planned next month. Normal life continuing in blissful ignorance while my world tilted sideways. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing my face. I told him everything. The teacher's revelation, the extinct language, the CIA classification. He listened with growing confusion, then shook his head. "Babe, she's probably overreacting. Maybe Oliver learned some made-up language from a YouTube video. Kids do that. Remember when he tried to teach himself Klingon?" I wanted to believe him, but Mrs. Pemberton's credentials and her fear had been too genuine. "We need to look at what my dad left Oliver. The trunk." Dennis's expression shifted. "Your dad's trunk? The one you said we shouldn't open because it felt like violating his privacy?" I was already heading toward the basement where we'd stored it 6 months ago. The trunk was military-grade, dark green metal with a combination lock I'd never tried to open. My father's instructions had been specific in his will. For Oliver only, to be opened when he asks about the recordings. At the time, I'd thought it was just my father being cryptical. He'd always been secretive about his work as a translator for various government agencies. Now those words felt ominous. Dennis followed me down the basement stairs. "What recordings? Your dad never mentioned recordings to me." He'd mentioned them to me exactly once, when I was 16. I'd found him crying in his study late one night, a bottle of scotch empty on his desk, and foreign voices playing from speakers I couldn't see. When I'd asked what he was listening to, he'd looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize and said, "The voices of people who don't exist anymore, people I couldn't save." I'd left him there and never asked again. Now I wondered if those voices had been speaking Koresh. The trunk sat in the corner behind boxes of Christmas decorations. I'd avoided it for months, telling myself I was respecting my father's wishes, but truthfully, I'd been afraid of what I might find. My father's death had been sudden, a stroke at 72 while he was working in his study. The paramedics said he'd been dead for hours before my mother found him. His computer had been running, headphones still on his head, playing something she couldn't identify. She'd turned it off without listening. Dennis helped me drag the trunk into the light. "Do you know the combination?" I shook my head, but as I looked at the lock, muscle memory took over. My fingers moved to numbers before my conscious mind caught up. 3, 14, 87. My father's birth month, my birthday, and the year of his first child, the year I was born. The trunk clicked open. Inside were things that made no sense together. Digital audio recorders, dozens of them, all labeled with dates and codes. Photographs of people I didn't recognize, mostly older men and women with weathered faces, wearing traditional clothing I couldn't place. Maps marked with coordinates and notes in my father's handwriting. And at the bottom, a letter with my name on it in an envelope that had never been sealed. Dennis picked up one of the recorders. "What the hell was your dad into?" I opened the letter. My father's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, suggesting he'd written this near the end of his life. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Oliver has started speaking Koresh. I knew this day would come. I've been playing the recordings for him since he was an infant. When you brought him to visit, when you left him with me for weekend babysitting, I would play them while he slept. Children's brains absorb languages differently than adults. By the time he's 7 or 8, he'll be fluent without consciously knowing why. I'm sorry for doing this without your consent, but I had no choice. The Koresh people didn't go extinct in 1987. 73 of them survived the purges. I helped hide them. I was part of a CIA operation that was supposed to extract and eliminate the remaining speakers to prevent them from testifying about what they'd witnessed. Instead, I turned. I got them out. I gave them new identities. I've spent 30 years protecting them from the people who want them dead. The recordings in this trunk are their oral histories, evidence of atrocities that powerful people need to stay buried. Oliver speaking Koresh makes him a living repository of a language the world thinks is extinct. When the wrong people find out, they'll come for him." My hands were numb. I read the letter twice, then 3 times, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Dennis was staring at me with an expression caught between disbelief and horror. "This is insane. Your dad was a translator. He worked from home. He didn't run covert operations." I picked up one of the recorders and pressed play. A woman's voice filled the basement, speaking in the same language I'd heard Oliver use. The rhythm, the clicks, the tonal variations. It was unmistakably Koresh. Then the voice switched to accented English. "My name is Tamara Kovostova. I am 63 years old. I am the last of my family. In 1985, soldiers came to our village. They said we were spies because we could speak the old language, because our grandparents had written down what they saw during the war. They said our knowledge was dangerous. They killed everyone. I watched my children die. They would have killed me, but a man came. An American man who spoke our language badly but with kindness. He said he could save some of us if we agreed to never speak our language again, never tell our stories. He said he was betraying his country to save us. That man was Robert Reeves." My father's name in a dead woman's voice. I dropped the recorder. Dennis caught it before it hit the floor. He turned it off and set it down gently. "Evelyn, we need to call someone. The police or the FBI or, I don't know, but we can't just sit on this." I shook my head, already pulling out my phone. My father's letter says when the wrong people find out. That means they don't know yet. But Mrs. Pemberton does. She recognized the language. She has videos of Oliver speaking it. If she tells anyone or if she's already told someone, we're in danger. My call to Mrs. Pemberton went to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me immediately, that we needed to discuss Oliver's situation privately. Then I called the school directly. The secretary told me Mrs. Pemberton had left early, saying she had a family emergency. She'd taken her personal belongings and wouldn't be back until Monday. That was 3 days away. I felt ice water in my veins. Mrs. Pemberton had recognized an extinct language, documented it for 2 weeks, and then suddenly left with all her belongings hours after showing me the evidence. Either she was scared, or she was reporting to someone. Dennis grabbed my arm. "We need to get Oliver out of school, right now." We drove back to the elementary school in record time. Oliver was in after-school care, playing with blocks in the gymnasium with 20 other kids. He looked up when he saw us and smiled, completely oblivious to the danger circling him. "Mom, can I show you what I built?" I forced a smile. "In the car, buddy. We're going home early today." The aftercare supervisor looked puzzled but signed Oliver out without question. As we walked to the parking lot, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street with 2 men inside. They were watching the school entrance, watching us. Dennis saw them too. "Get in the car, now." We buckled Oliver in and pulled out quickly. The sedan followed us. It wasn't even subtle. They stayed 2 cars back, matching our speed exactly. Dennis took a random right turn. They followed. He took another turn, then another, trying to lose them in the suburban maze of our neighborhood. They stayed with us. Dad, why are we going this way? Oliver asked from the back seat. This isn't how we go home. I turned to face him, keeping my voice calm. Ollie, I need to ask you something important. The language you've been speaking at school, the one with the clicking sounds. Where did you learn it? He looked confused. What language? I don't speak another language. My heart sank. He didn't even know he was doing it. Mrs. Pemberton had been right. He'd absorbed Koresh so young, through my father's recordings, that it had become part of his unconscious linguistic repertoire. He was code switching without realizing it, his brain accessing a language database he didn't know he possessed. Dennis was driving faster now, heading for the highway. We need to go somewhere public, the police station. I agreed, pulling out my phone to call 911. Before I could dial, the phone rang. Unknown number. Against every instinct, I answered. Mrs. Reeves, my name is Colton Thorne. I'm with a private security division contracted by the federal government. We've been monitoring communications related to extinct language protocols. Your son was flagged when his teacher ran audio analysis through an academic database that pings our systems. We need to bring you in for a conversation. I hung up immediately. Dennis looked at me in the rearview mirror. What? Before I could answer, the sedan behind us accelerated, pulling alongside us at a red light. The passenger window rolled down. The man inside held up a badge that looked official, motioning for us to pull over. Don't stop, I said. Run the light. Dennis hesitated for half a second, then floored it. We blew through the intersection, horns blaring around us. The sedan followed, now openly pursuing. Mom, what's happening? Oliver's voice was scared now. I turned to him, trying to project calm I didn't feel. Everything's fine, baby. We're just playing a game with those men behind us. My phone rang again. Same unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker so Dennis could hear. Colton Thorne's voice was calm, almost bored. Running is pointless. We have your license plate. We know where you live. We know where your husband works. We can make this very easy or very difficult. All we want is to understand how your son learned Koresh and ensure that knowledge doesn't spread. Pull over and let's have a civilized conversation. I kept my voice steady. My father's letter said people want the Koresh speakers dead. You're not here to have a conversation. You're here to eliminate a security risk. A pause. Then Thorne's voice changed, losing the pretense of friendliness. Your father was a traitor who sabotaged a legitimate national security operation. He hid witnesses to events that could damage crucial international relationships. Those relationships are more important than 73 refugees and a dead language. We allowed him to live because we believed the Koresh knowledge died with him. Now we discover he passed it to his grandson. That changes the equation. Dennis took a sharp turn into a shopping center parking lot, weaving between cars. The sedan followed but had to slow down due to pedestrians. We gained a few seconds. What do you want from us? I asked, watching the sedan catch up. Your son's linguistic memory needs to be neutralized. There are pharmaceutical protocols that can disrupt language center development without causing permanent harm. He'll forget Koresh. He'll forget he ever knew it. You'll sign documentation agreeing to never discuss this matter. Your family goes back to normal life. Everyone wins. Except my son, who would have his brain chemically altered to erase knowledge he didn't even know he had. Except the 73 Koresh speakers my father had spent his life protecting, whose last connection to their heritage was about to be erased. Except the truth about whatever atrocities they'd witnessed. I hung up and turned to Dennis. We need to find the survivors. My father's papers must have information about where he hid them. Dennis looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Evelyn, we need to go to the police. These people are threatening to drug our son. I pulled out the maps from the trunk, which I'd grabbed before leaving the basement. The police won't protect us from a federal security division. But if we find the Koresh survivors and go public with their stories, then harming Oliver becomes pointless. The knowledge won't be contained to him anymore. It'll be everywhere. The sedan was closing in again. Dennis made another random turn, buying us seconds. Oliver was crying now, scared by the chase he didn't understand. I wanted to comfort him, but was too focused on the maps spread across my lap. They showed locations across the United States, small towns, rural areas, places where refugees could disappear into American anonymity. My father had marked 7 locations with red X's, coordinates, names, dates. I recognized one address, a farm in Montana that my father had owned for 30 years, supposedly as an investment property. He'd never let us visit. Now I understood why. It was a safe house. Dennis's phone rang. His sister. He put it on speaker while driving. Hey, not a great time. She cut him off, voice frantic. Dennis, there are men at our parents' house asking about you and Evelyn. They have badges, but Mom doesn't trust them. They're asking about Oliver. What's going on? Thorne was moving faster than I'd expected, covering all bases, applying pressure on family. Classic intimidation tactics. I grabbed Dennis's phone. Amy, tell your parents to leave. Go to a hotel and pay cash. Don't use credit cards. Don't tell anyone where you're going. We'll explain later. She started to protest, but Dennis interrupted. Amy, just do it, please. We hung up. The sedan was right behind us now, inches from our bumper. Thorne called again. I answered. We have teams moving on every member of your extended family. This ends when you pull over. Don't make this harder on yourselves. I felt rage replace fear. These people had killed an entire ethnic group to hide war crimes, erased their language, hunted the survivors for decades, and now were threatening my family. My father had betrayed his country to save 73 lives. Now I understood why. Because some oaths of allegiance matter less than basic human decency. You're not neutralizing my son, I said into the phone. You're not erasing what he knows, and you're not going to hide your crimes anymore. My father documented everything. Every atrocity, every name, every order. It's all on those recordings. The Koresh people know who gave the orders, who covered it up, who benefited. You want to drug my 7-year-old? Go ahead, but I'm going to make sure every news outlet in the country gets copies of those testimonies. Thorne's voice went cold. You're bluffing. You haven't had time to copy anything. He was right. I was bluffing. But he didn't know that. My father spent 30 years preparing for this moment. You think he didn't make redundant copies? You think he didn't establish dead man's switches? If anything happens to me or my family, everything goes public. Names, dates, evidence, your entire operation gets exposed. Silence on the other end. Then, pull over and let's negotiate. Dennis looked at me with wide eyes. He knew I was improvising, making up contingencies that didn't exist. But it was working. Thorne was hesitating. Drive to the airport, I told Dennis quietly. We're going to Montana. The airport made sense strategically. Public space, security cameras, crowds. Harder for Thorne's people to make a move without witnesses. We ditched our car in the long-term parking and ran for the terminal, Oliver clutching his backpack and asking questions we couldn't answer. The sedan pulled in behind us, but by the time the men got out, we were already inside the terminal. I bought 3 tickets to Montana using a credit card, knowing Thorne would see the transaction but not caring. He'd expect us to try to disappear. Instead, we were heading straight for what I hoped was still a functional safe house. The flight didn't leave for 2 hours. We stayed in the crowded food court, surrounded by travelers watching for Thorne's men. They were there, 2 of them, standing near the security checkpoint, watching but not approaching, waiting. My phone rang. Private number. Not Thorne this time. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Reeves, my name is Dr. Elise Korovin. I was a colleague of your father's. I need to speak with you urgently about the Koresh matter. Please don't hang up. Her voice had an accent I couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe. I kept my voice low. How do I know you're legitimate? She sighed. Your father's code name in the extraction operation was Shepherd. Mine was Sparrow. We worked together from 1987 to 1994, moving Koresh refugees to safety. I've been monitoring for any activation of your father's emergency protocols. When I saw the linguistic analysis flags in the academic database, I knew someone in the family had triggered his contingency. I assume that's your son. I walked away from Dennis and Oliver, phone pressed to my ear. If you worked with my father, why are you just contacting me now? Dr. Korovin's voice was patient. Because until now, your family was safe through ignorance. Your father kept his activities compartmentalized, but now your son has exposed the knowledge, and Thorne's division has been activated. They will not stop until the threat is neutralized. You need help that you don't currently have. I wanted to believe her, but trust felt impossible. How did you get this number? She said, your father listed me as one of his emergency contacts 20 years ago. His death triggered certain notifications to those of us in the network. I've been keeping loose tabs on his family ever since, waiting to see if the Koresh knowledge would resurface. I hoped it wouldn't. I'm sorry that it has. I made a decision. Can you help us get to the Montana property safely? Pause. Then, you're going to the sanctuary. Good. That's the right move. Yes, I can help. But Mrs. Reeves, you need to understand something. The Koresh people your father protected aren't just refugees anymore. They've built a life. They have children, grandchildren, American-born generations who know nothing of the old language or the old traumas. Going to the sanctuary means potentially exposing all of them. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I looked at Oliver, who was eating French fries with Dennis, trying to be brave. They're coming for my son. I don't have a choice, Dr. Korovin said. Then I'll meet you in Montana. I'll text you coordinates for a meeting point. And Mrs. Reeves, don't trust anyone who approaches you claiming to be from official agencies. Thorne's people have infiltrated multiple levels of law enforcement. The only people you can trust are those who knew your father and the password. When you get to the sanctuary, tell them Shepard sent you and give them the phrase, "The Valley remembers." The flight to Montana was tense. Thorne's men were on the same plane, seated rows behind us. They made no attempt to hide their presence. The message was clear. We couldn't run. They would follow us anywhere. Oliver fell asleep against my shoulder, exhausted by fear and confusion he couldn't articulate. Dennis held my hand across the armrest, neither of us speaking. What was there to say? Our normal life had detonated in a single afternoon. When we landed in Montana, it was nearly midnight. The airport was small, just a few gates and a single baggage claim. Thorne's men followed us out to the rental car area. I expected them to make a move, but they just watched as we got into our rental vehicle and drove away. They knew where we were going, or thought they did. The coordinates Dr. Corvin had sent led to a truck stop 40 miles outside the airport. I drove while Dennis held Oliver in the back seat, the boy finally sleeping soundly. The Montana darkness was complete. No streetlights, just highway and stars. We pulled into the truck stop at 1 a.m. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes was sitting at a corner booth. She raised her coffee cup slightly when we entered. Dr. Corvin. We slid into the booth across from her. She studied Oliver's sleeping face with an expression I couldn't read. He looks like Robert. Your father was a good man, stubborn and reckless, but good. I was too tired for pleasantries. Where's the sanctuary? How do we get there safely? Dr. Corvin pulled out a printed map, not digital. Thorne's people are tracking your phones, your credit cards, your rental car. They'll follow you to the sanctuary and then they'll have everyone in one place. That's what they want. A clean sweep. Eliminate all the loose ends at once. Dennis leaned forward. So what do we do? Dr. Corvin's smile was sharp. We split up. You take your son and this vehicle and drive to these coordinates. It's a cabin where you can stay safely for a few days. Meanwhile, I'll drive your rental car to the sanctuary and let Thorne's people follow me. They'll think they've tracked you to the location. It'll buy us time to warn the Koresh community and implement evacuation protocols. I felt something loosen in my chest. You'd do that? Put yourself at risk for people you barely know? She shook her head. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Robert and for the 73 people we saved. Your father died protecting their secret. I won't let his sacrifice be wasted. Besides, Thorne's people won't harm me immediately. They'll want to interrogate me, find out what I know. That gives you a 72-hour head start. She slid a key across the table. This is for a vehicle parked behind the truck stop. An old pickup truck registered to a false identity. Use it. The cabin has supplies and secure communication equipment. Once you're there, contact this number. It's a lawyer your father worked with who specializes in classified information disclosure. His name is Bernard Ashby. He's been holding sealed documents for 20 years waiting for this moment. Tell him Shepard has died and the sanctuary is compromised. He'll know what to do. I took the key with shaking hands. I don't know how to thank you. Dr. Corvin stood, picking up our rental car keys. Thank me by keeping your son alive. He's the last bridge between the modern world and the Koresh language. If he survives, their culture survives. That's all that matters. We switched vehicles in the dark parking lot behind the truck stop. The old pickup was a weathered Ford that looked like it hadn't run in years, but the engine turned over smoothly. Dennis drove this time while I held Oliver, who'd woken briefly during the transfer before falling back asleep. The cabin was another hour into the mountains, accessed by a dirt road that would have been easy to miss if we hadn't been looking for it. The structure was small but well-maintained, clearly used regularly. Inside were supplies, food, water, medical equipment, and a sophisticated radio setup that looked military-grade. There was also a laptop with a satellite internet connection. I booted it up while Dennis carried Oliver to one of the bedrooms. The desktop had a single folder labeled, "For Evelyn." Inside were audio files, hundreds of them. My father's voice explaining everything. The 1985 massacres in the Caucasus region. The Soviet-US joint operation to eliminate witnesses to illegal weapons testing on civilian populations. The orders that came from both Moscow and Washington to erase the Koresh people and their testimonies. The 73 survivors my father had smuggled out, giving them new identities, new lives, new languages. But before erasing their old lives completely, he'd recorded their stories, every atrocity, every name, every crime. I knew this day would come, my father's recorded voice said. I knew eventually someone would discover the truth, and I wouldn't be here to protect them. If you're hearing this, it means Oliver has revealed the knowledge and you've been forced to run. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm sorry for making your son a target, but I couldn't let their stories die. I couldn't let the world forget what was done to them. I listened to hours of testimony while Dennis slept in a chair by the window, keeping watch. The voices of elderly Koresh speakers describing the day soldiers came, the sound of gunfire, the smell of burning homes, watching their families die. Then the American man who appeared, speaking broken Koresh, offering salvation at a terrible price. You must forget who you are, my father's voice said in the recordings. You must never speak your language again. You must let the world believe you're extinct. It's the only way you'll survive. They'd agreed. 73 people scattered across the United States, given new names, new histories, new identities. Over the decades, they'd built American lives. They'd married, had children, become citizens. Most of their children didn't know about the Koresh heritage. It was too dangerous. The secret died with each generation, except my father had taught it to Oliver, the last speaker of a language the world thought was extinct. By dawn, I'd listened to enough testimony to understand the scale of what my father had protected. The weapons testing had killed thousands. Both US and Soviet officials had covered it up by eliminating the witnesses and destroying the evidence. The Koresh people were just one group among many that had been erased to hide Cold War crimes. But they were the only group with a living witness now, my 7-year-old son who could speak the language of the dead. I called Bernard Ashby, the lawyer Dr. Corrivan had mentioned. He answered on the second ring despite the early hour. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. Shepard is gone? I confirmed my father's death and the situation with Oliver and Thorne's division. Ashby listened in silence, then said, Robert prepared for this. He gave me documents that were to be released upon specific conditions. 1. His death. 2. Any attempt to harm his family. 3. Discovery of the Koresh knowledge. You've triggered all 3. I have authorization to release everything to a list of journalists, prosecutors, and international human rights organizations. Once I push the button, it can't be stopped. I thought about Oliver sleeping in the next room, about the 73 Koresh people living quiet American lives, about my father's 30-year commitment to protecting them. If you release the documents, what happens to the survivors? Will they be safe? Ashby's voice was careful. They'll be exposed, yes. Their identities will become known, but exposure might be their best protection. Once their stories are public, harming them becomes counterproductive. The crimes are out there, the responsible parties are identified, and the witnesses are known. Thorne's people lose the incentive to eliminate them because elimination won't contain the damage anymore. It was the same logic I'd used when bluffing to Thorne. Spread the knowledge so widely that silencing the source becomes pointless. Do it, I said. Release everything, Ashby said. Mrs. Reeves, once this goes public, your life changes permanently. Your family will be at the center of an international scandal. There will be trials, investigations, media attention. You'll be protected, but you'll never be anonymous again. Are you certain? I looked at Oliver's drawings on the wall from earlier that night. Crayon pictures of trucks and dinosaurs, a normal child who'd been turned into a weapon without his knowledge or consent. I thought about the Koresh people my father had saved, who'd lived in silence for decades. I thought about the governments that had murdered thousands and erased their histories. I'm certain, I said. Do it now. Ashby said, I'll begin the releases within the hour. You should prepare for significant attention. I'll send federal marshals to your location to provide protection. Expect them within 3 hours. In the meantime, stay where you are and don't communicate with anyone else. After hanging up, I woke Dennis and explained what I'd done. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. So that's it? We just blew up our entire lives? I nodded. Yes, but we kept Oliver safe, and we gave the Koresh people justice. He rubbed his face exhausted. I hope you're right. I hope your father's documents are as damning as everyone thinks, because if they're not, we just made ourselves targets for nothing. An hour later, my phone started exploding with calls from news outlets, blocked numbers, and contacts I hadn't heard from in years. The story was breaking. Major news organizations were running headlines about Cold War cover-ups, ethnic cleansing, and classified documents proving U.S. involvement in atrocities. My father's name was mentioned repeatedly as the whistleblower who'd spent 30 years protecting witnesses. The Koresh people were being interviewed, their American lives documented alongside their refugee origins. 73 survivors telling their stories to the world. By noon, the cabin was surrounded by federal marshals providing protection. News helicopters circled overhead trying to get footage. A temporary no-fly zone was established. Bernard Ashby called to say 3 senators were demanding immediate investigations and that the Attorney General had opened a formal inquiry. Thorne's division was being shut down pending review. Dennis and I stood on the cabin's porch watching the chaos, Oliver between us holding both our hands. He didn't understand what was happening, just that suddenly lots of people cared about the language his grandpa had taught him in his sleep. Mom, are we in trouble? He asked. I knelt down to his eye level. No, baby, we're not in trouble. We just helped tell an important story that a lot of people didn't want told. Sometimes doing the right thing makes powerful people angry. He considered this, then asked, Did Grandpa do the right thing? I felt tears burning. Yes, Grandpa did the right thing, and now we have to keep doing it. Over the next weeks, the story consumed national media. The testimonies my father had recorded were released in full. Names of officials, both U.S. and Soviet, were made public. International tribunals were convened. Criminal investigations opened across multiple countries. The 73 Koresh survivors became symbols of resistance, people who'd lost everything but survived to tell the truth. Oliver became known as the boy who spoke the extinct language, the living bridge between genocide and justice. Linguists wanted to study him. The Koresh community embraced him as one of their own, even though he was American-born. He didn't fully understand his role, but he understood that the language his grandpa had given him was important, that it meant something. Thorne and 4 members of his division were arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to threatening a minor. The cases would take years to prosecute fully, but the arrests sent a message. The cover-up was over. Dr. Corrivan visited us once the initial chaos settled. She brought gifts from the Koresh families, traditional items they'd kept hidden for decades. She told Oliver stories about his grandfather, about the brave thing he'd done saving people nobody else would save. Mrs. Pemberton reached out through the school district, apologizing for triggering the crisis, but saying she'd known she had no choice. When she'd recognized Koresh, she'd felt obligated to report it through academic channels, not realizing those channels were monitored by intelligence agencies. She'd been terrified when she learned what she'd set in motion. I forgave her. She'd been following her conscience, same as my father, same as me. The school held an assembly about the Koresh people, turning Oliver's crisis into an educational opportunity. Other students learned about extinct languages, ethnic cleansing, and the importance of protecting witnesses to historical atrocities. Oliver gave a short presentation, speaking a few phrases in Koresh that had been rehearsed with surviving elders. The gymnasium erupted in applause. He'd gone from being weird to being special. My father's name was cleared posthumously. He received honors from human rights organizations, linguistic preservation societies, and refugee advocacy groups. A scholarship was established in his name at the university where Dr. Korovin taught. Streets in several Koresh survivor communities were renamed after him. The man who'd lived in secret, in shame, in fear for 30 years became a hero. I wished he'd lived to see it. Dennis and I testified before congressional committees about Thorne's threats and the pharmaceutical protocols they'd wanted to use on Oliver. The testimony led to policy changes around how intelligence agencies handled linguistic and cultural information. New protections were established for witnesses and refugees. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was something. 2 years after Mrs. Pemberton asked me why my child knew an extinct language, I stood in a community center in Montana watching Oliver teach Koresh phrases to a dozen children. Some were descendants of survivors. Others were just local kids interested in learning. The language that was supposed to die was experiencing a resurrection. Linguists were documenting it properly. Educational materials were being developed. The Koresh people were reclaiming their heritage after 40 years of forced silence. Oliver, now 9, spoke Koresh fluently and without self-consciousness. He'd become the face of linguistic preservation, appearing in documentaries and giving talks at universities. He didn't remember being scared that day we ran from Thorne's people. He just remembered that his grandpa had given him something important, something worth protecting. I thought about my father often, about the choices he'd made, the secrets he'd kept, the burden he'd carried alone for decades. I understood now why he'd been crying that night when I was 16, listening to voices of people who didn't exist anymore. He'd been mourning the ones he couldn't save while protecting the ones he could. I wished I could tell him that his sacrifice hadn't been wasted, that the Koresh people were safe now, that their stories had brought justice. But he was gone, and all I had were the recordings and the knowledge that he'd trusted me to finish what he started. As Oliver laughed with the other children, speaking a language that shouldn't exist, I felt my father's presence, not literally, but in the continuation of his work, in the survival of the people he'd saved, in the grandson who carried their words forward into a future where extinction was no longer inevitable. The valley remembered, and now the world remembered too. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too, so subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.